When Joey was first brought to me, I didn't really understand what it was his parents and doctor wanted. At the time, I worked at a small startup that was experimenting with new techniques in magnetoencephalography, commonly called MEG, which is a sort of real-time MRI that allows medical technicians to scan a patient's ongoing brain patterns. More specifically, for the previous 2 years, my company had been working on visual reconstruction. Our algorithms could build a black and white image of what a subject was processing in their visual cortex. In short, if you imagined a sight, we could see it with you. I immediately disliked Mrs. Campbell. I'd already gotten several pushy emails from her, so by the time she and Joey showed up in my office unannounced, I already knew exactly who I was talking to. Her power suit, uptight sitting position, and severe expression only added to her edge. "Look, I've already had this conversation 87 times before," she stated, eyeing me as I moved to sit behind my desk. "You'll go on about how this isn't your specialty, or Joey's case isn't appropriate for the technology, or a dozen other excuses. I get it. It's not in your job description." Lifting a hand sheepishly at having been so expertly called out, I went to speak, but she cut me off. "I'll have you know that I literally learned neuroscience to better pursue the truth of my son's condition. Every other doctor in the tri-state area has come up short. This is my lead. I know enough to make an educated guess. Your technology will uncover something about Joey's problem." She let silence hang over my office. Next to her, Joey sat with his face buried in a thick book. He was as small and gangly as I'd expected an ill 6-year-old boy to be, but Descartes' discourse on the method seemed a bit out of his age range. My immediate suspicion was that the mother herself might be driving some of her son's endless night terrors. I considered her words for a moment before asking, "You learned neuroscience?" She was not amused. "Yes." "Are you a doctor?" "No." "Then where did you find the time?" The slightest hint of a proud smile curled up the side of her lip. "I'm extremely motivated." There was no arguing that, since we did need a younger test subject to round out our results, something I'm sure she was aware of. I begrudgingly acquiesced and hurried her out of my office so that I could speak to her son alone. "You reading Descartes? That's pretty heavy stuff for a boy your age." He looked up with sharp, bespectacled eyes, surrounded by halos of exhaustion. "There's so little time." Subtly put off by his odd answer and perceptive gaze, I shrugged away my apprehension. "All right then, let's begin." I led him to the next room and explained that our process would require ongoing meetings and tests, since every brain and all the patterns within were unique to each person. The biofeedback mechanisms and tests would take time to adapt algorithms. Never mind. He was reading his book again. I couldn't help but smile. At his age, I'd escaped into books the same way. His overbearing mother likely didn't help his desire to be present in the moment either. The first tests were simple enough. I hooked him up to a less intensive helmet-only version of our machine and had him run through our anchoring images, a tree, a kite, a basketball, and a variety of other pictures with basic shapes and strong recognition quotients. The written portion and medical history had already been submitted by his mother. Done for the day, I walked him out. "Our computers will process our recordings of your brain for a few days, and then we'll be able to do more next week." He hesitated before going back into the lobby. "You're not like the other doctors." I smiled. "I'm not?" "No, you're actually here." Interesting praise. Medical professionals were certainly encouraged to develop emotional distance, but I was not that kind of doctor. "Thanks, Joey." He grinned and nodded hard enough for his hair to flop, and then he ran out into the lobby, his book still clutched in his hands. At one appointment a week, it took about 3 months to truly narrow in on an accurate brain map. The interesting thing about working with such a young subject was that his brain was more malleable and changing far more rapidly than any of our adult subjects. Other technicians sometimes worked with him, but I made sure to stick with his case and keep an eye on him. As we talked about philosophy, life, and his favorite superheroes among the Avengers, it began to hit home that this bookish little boy slept less than 2 hours a night. Racked with night terrors as he was, every week we wasted was another week of torture he didn't deserve. I was more than happy to move forward with looser confidence intervals than normal in our data. His brain was constantly changing anyway, I argued, not telling them my real reason for wanting to begin our investigation early. I was actually excited that first night we slid him into the tube of the machine for a real imaging run, and I think that excitement transferred to his attitude. There would be no more guesswork, pills, or therapy. After a never-ending series of failures and a lifetime of suffering, a medical mystery that had defied all regimens and treatments, we were finally going to witness his night terrors directly. We would stand with him against his fears and see what he was seeing. He put down his book completely for the first time since I'd known him and slid into that imaging tube with a worried but hopeful expression. Thanks to all the prep work and our years of computer and medical research already implemented, it was now as simple as watching the video feed, as our mainframe began deciphering the ongoing changes in the magnetic fields of the neurons in his visual cortex. As the fuzzy black and white image grew more coherent, the feed took on the appearance of someone filming from inside the sheer white tube. "Joey, can you hear me?" I asked. "Yeah. I'm going to flash some simple indicators along the tube above you, all right?" "I won't be scared." "All right, here we go." The technicians and I watched the video as the programmed patterns appeared as darker squares on the inside of the tube, at about a 5-second delay for processing the tremendous quantity of three-dimensional neural data the machine was reading every millisecond. "Looks good. Now comes the hard part, Joey." "What do I do?" "Now you have to sleep. Are you tired?" "I can sleep anywhere, even here," he breathed. "You want to know my secret?" I looked in through the test chamber window at his feet, wondering. "Sure, what?" He said triumphantly, "I'm always tired." The technicians and I shared an awkward laugh, and then we went about the business of waiting. He fell asleep rather quickly, and random scattered imaginings filled our feed, but the real data would only come once he had begun dreaming. I was reading a magazine when the first coherent images began flickering to life. There was a slow moment of strange tension that all of the men and women in the control room shared as the curious fuzzy blurs began as something primally recognizable and then sharpened into something unknown. What the hell had that been? For a second I'd felt as if well, I can't say for sure, even now. But the feed now showed a murky grayscale scene full of indeterminate fog and little wriggling black things. "What are those?" someone asked, and we all peered intently at the screen. Someone else wondered aloud, "Is this even a dream? It looks a view from a camera on a weather tower somewhere." It was a pertinent question. There was none of the mise-en-scène we'd observed in other subjects' dreams. Here there were no identifiable landmarks, no shifting locations, and, apparently, no sense of self. Joey's dream was simply his own point of view, floating somewhere foggy while scattered, unidentifiable bits of black motion moved about in strangely disgusting manners. I'd thought they were birds at first, purely by context, but my senses began linking the sight to that of a petri dish. Little black blobs wriggling in a foggy petri dish sky. What the hell were we seeing here? And more importantly, why was this the source of so much stress for Joey that it always woke him up? Talking quietly in the control room, we each agreed that dreams like that would be rather peaceful if that was all that happened. Of course, that was not all that happened. Mrs. Campbell herself was out in the waiting room dozing, and I requested she come to my office immediately on threat of arrest. Our security guard and 2 technicians stood as witness while I turned my laptop around and showed her our recording. "This is Joey's dream," I told her, barely covering my anger and disgust at what the video had apparently turned out to be. "This is what wakes him up screaming multiple times a night every night. Mrs. Campbell, I hate that I have to ask you this, but do you submerge your son underwater in a vat of leeches?" "That's ridiculous," she spat, furious. "I'll get my lawyer immediately if you're going to accuse me of child abuse." I didn't work this hard his entire life to cause the problem myself, you son of a bitch. The guard coughed, and she sat back down and uncurled her fist. As unpleasant as it was, I had to probe deeper. Have you ever heard of Munchausen by proxy syndrome? She took a long breath in through her nose and then said flatly, "That's not what this is." We all watched in silence for a few heartbeats as the horrible end of Joey's dream played out on screen. One of the distant, wriggling black blobs shot forward, growing quickly into a massive swimming annelid worm that opened a horrible mouth ringed with teeth and attempted to swallow the point of view itself. The video cut back to his normal eyesight inside the tube just before, due to Joey himself waking up screaming and panicked. Mrs. Campbell stared with a moment of true vulnerable fear before quickly donning her mask of confidence again. "That's what he dreams about?" She sat a little taller. "Then we've made progress. It's heartening to finally see what's going on in his head. As for your accusation, you didn't look at his files closely enough. He's been having trouble sleeping since the day he was born. There is literally no way I could have caused this in him, especially in those first few days. I wasn't even allowed to hold him because he was so weak due to an inability to sleep well." I shook my head. "I saw that in the files, but I know the records have been faked. The human brain restructures itself around age 2 or 3 and erases everything that came before. I seriously doubt it's at all possible this nightmare has recurred since before that time, let alone as far back as the first day of his birth. That would imply some sort of chemical or neurological poisoning." Noticing a certain subtle droop in his mother's shoulders, I turned to one of the technicians with a horrible suspicion. "Do we have Mrs. Campbell's medical records?" "We did, as part of a legal footnote for putting Joey in the program. I leafed through to 6 years ago, and there it was. You were on nootropics before and during his pregnancy. Cognitive enhancers, untested on pregnant women and children." I studied her defiant expression. "I bet you're still on them. You just learned neuroscience in your free time, did you?" She finally spoke, and with vehemence, "I'm a single mother, you asshole. Have you tried modafinil yourself? It was the only way I could work 100-hour weeks, between my job and raising Joey and coping with his illness." One of the technicians spoke up with a sour face. "But you were on them before you even had him." "That's enough," I said, raising a hand. All anger had drained from me at finding out that this was not intentional. It wouldn't help Joey to call the authorities into this. Now we know another piece of the puzzle. "Mrs. Campbell, I apologize for inappropriately putting you on the spot, but I hope you see we've learned something for it." She shoved away from our guard, but scaled down her aggressive stance. "Next week, same time? How about tomorrow night?" I couldn't stomach putting him through another week of waiting. The other technicians agreed to work overtime, and we came in on Saturday. Joey came in with Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning under his arm, and I asked him, "You're really into the philosophy, aren't you?" Again, he said, "There's so little time." He added more to this second answer because we were closer. "Now that it knows about us." I frowned. "What do you mean by that?" He seemed confused at my question, but I didn't want to push him further. He was, after all, still a permanently exhausted 6-year-old boy. We set him up in the machine and proceeded to wait for his dreams to begin. Now that we knew the cause of all this was likely some sort of neurological poisoning during pregnancy, we spent the entire wait speculating and arguing. Hammering out ideas, we came to the educated guess that some sort of traumatic memory had been permanently ingrained in his neural makeup thanks to the cognitive-enhancing drug that had riddled his body throughout gestation. "The womb," one of our female technicians shouted in the manner of a eureka. "That's the cause of the fixed murky perspective. He's literally remembering being in the womb. I bet if we tried out our colorization technology, we'd find out that murkiness is red." As his dream began again with that same perspective in that same foggy void, we added our new colorization algorithms, and the video sharpened. Now we could see that he was indeed floating in some sort of nebulous red environment, which would have been expected from the dim light penetrating Mrs. Campbell's skin from outside. So our theory was coming together, but the obvious question had to be asked. Why the leeches? We threw out a couple ideas, but our resident neuropsychologist could only guess. Maybe they're an addition or a change due to later fears, perhaps leeches he saw on television. The original form of this memory is impossible to know for sure. Something scared him horribly when he was very young, and this is what remains to torture him. He hesitated. Maybe this happens to all babies, really, and we just forget because of the restructuring of the young brain 2 years in. They were good theories, but I was still worried about Joey himself. So how do we fix it? Honestly, maybe electroshock therapy? What? No, come on. Someone else threw in a radical idea. Maybe show him the video and ask him what he thinks it is? I looked up and jumped back just as the giant leech-like creature again swallowed the screen, and Joey woke up screaming. Seeing the video as real might scare him even more, but it was worth a shot. With Mrs. Campbell and 2 other technicians who Joey trusted in attendance, we sat with him in a private room the next day, a Sunday. He laid his book carefully on the table and watched the video on my laptop with a pale face. That's it, that's my dream. His mother held his hand, but he didn't panic like his records said he had before in hypnotherapy and dream therapy sessions. It's real. He began breathing harder, but he seemed to retain control. I don't want to talk about it. They tried to make me talk about it before. I couldn't describe it. I knew that from his records, and I'd already had an idea to handle it. They asked you to describe it before, because they couldn't see it. Are you able instead to talk around it, now that we can see it for ourselves? He fought back tears. I'll try. All right, Joey. Do you have a sense of when this was? Just nod for yes or shake your head for no. He nodded. Good. Was it a long time ago? He nodded. And you were smaller than you are now? He nodded emphatically. Did something scare you at that time? He nodded weakly, his features draining to white. I don't like thinking about them. Almost as if to protect himself, he took his book and held it to his chest. Them? I pointed to the unmoving black blobs in the paused video. You mean these guys? Yeah. I looked to the others for confirmation before continuing with our plan, now that the questions would get riskier. Are you aware that creatures like this really exist and are harmless? That got him paying attention. Really? I can show you some scientific information on them if you want to see. They're not nightmares. They're real tiny little things that can't harm you. Lowering his philosophy book to his lap, he took the new text I'd offered him and looked at the article for leeches. He began to smile and even laughed. Is this for real? They're that small? He looked at his hand and compared it to the life-size millimeters-long picture of a worm. I must be huge now. I had no idea because there's no way to tell then and now. His mother rubbed his arm, not daring to hope. So you're not afraid of them anymore? He shook his head, flopping his hair about. No way. I'm gonna sleep right now and stomp that stupid leech if he tries to eat me this time. I'm the one in charge, right? Yeah, I said, smiling uncontrollably. I looked to his mother. Let's get him to the chamber and see how he does. She nodded happily. I couldn't imagine what she was going through, finally seeing some understanding and progress for her son's torment. We let her sit with him this time, hand on his ankle, while he lay inside the machine. He was excited, but sleep came easily thanks to his permanent exhaustion, and we all waited expectantly for his dream to begin. This time, he finally had a sense of self, and we watched as imagined hands paddled out before his sight to move him along through the crimson liquid environment. Now that we had some parallax, we began getting a sense of his environment, and it turned out to be a vast flowing tube rather than the small space we'd expected. The leech-like creatures still wriggled in the distance, but he eluded them by swimming away from his initial location. Moving with the current, he began passing floating little dots of flaring light, colored red by the thick, unknown liquid, and these too moved with the flow. Someone else was the first to ask, "What the hell are we seeing?" As the tube opened up into a mammoth pulsing cavern whose walls were fleshy and striated, I think it slowly began to dawn on all of us that our theory had been both horribly wrong and horribly right. This was a memory from a time many years before when Joey had been much smaller, but he had not had these experiences during pregnancy. I began to understand when we saw the first flaring point of floating light suddenly flash and form into the fading silhouette of an infant human before vanishing in a strange blur. It wasn't possible. This wasn't a gestation memory. Joey had been brought into existence filled with memory enhancers, and the great barrier of brain restructuring that made all human babies forget had failed to work on him. This was pre-life. We stared in horrified awe as he swam through tube after tube, slowly revealing to us the nature of pre-life. It was alive. The tubes were arteries, and the chambers strange hearts. Leech-like creatures ate the flares, and weird octopus-like entities ate the leeches, and strange propelled mouths ate them in turn, all winding a web of eating upon eating that seemed to host thousands of different types of organisms in every artery. Existence before birth was maddeningly full of life in every respect, so much so that bits of that desperate moving and writhing energy gathered into flaring points and became sentient in our form of reality. Were these souls? Or were these simply the perspective eye, which rode around in each of our minds, looking out from our eyes and hearing through our ears, to experience the physical world and wonder at the meaning of it all? His philosophy books. What if? No. Wake him up. The others refused, and I backed away from the feed. They hadn't heard what he'd said, in so many tiny little ways. They hadn't pieced together the grander horror out there known only to this boy. He was a living soul in the truest and most profound sense. Joey knew the pre-life form of existence so implicitly that he'd never bothered to confirm with other people that they didn't know. And he'd spent every waking moment of his life reading philosophy books because there's so little time now that it knows about us. I'm not ashamed to admit that I panicked. You might even call it a breakdown. I just happen to know what it is now, an unknowable entity so tremendous that it is a form of existence unto itself, filled with energetic life to the point of bursting spontaneously into our very souls themselves, and I shudder for the future. I'm not afraid of it destroying us. No, against a creature so cosmic, we would never see it coming, and never suffer a millisecond. I'm not even convinced that dealing death is something such a beast of life is capable of. No, I'm afraid for that other fate, the path where it has become aware of our child souls, escaping into another mode of existence through birth, the path where it puts a stop to that leak of its vitality. Women will still get pregnant and babies will still be born because those are physical animal processes, but without a spark from pre-life existence, what will be riding around in their heads? What will see the world? What will wonder at the meaning of it all? I shudder because I know as a scientist that vacuums of all sorts tend to be filled. Something will possess our babies and become their souls. It just won't be us. By Joey's subtle indication, it may already be happening, and we may already be outnumbered. After all, I'm not like the other people in his life. I'm actually here. Hello there, and thank you for watching. This story is part of Matt Dymerski's Multiverse. Check out the playlist on screen or in the description for more stories from this universe. Stay creepy and see you in the next story.